Howdy. I'm sitting here at Lake Whitney on the Brazos River. Beautiful lake, but we're not really here to talk about Lake Whitney. We're here more to talk about the Brazos River and what was found about 11 miles south of where I'm at right now. In 1966, there was a rock shelter discovered there that ended up being one of the most important archaeological sites in the United States, bar none. So what did they find at Horn Shelter number 2 and what made it so important? Come on, let's go talk about it. In 1966, while he was on a fishing trip on the Brazos River, Albert Redder noticed across the river that there was something that looked like it may have at one time been a shelter that had been filled in, and so he swam across the river to investigate. What he found was a mostly filled in rock shelter. It had been partially excavated on one end, and so you could barely get up and stand under the rock shelter at this one end. And he looked around there a little bit. He noticed people had been digging around in there. He thought maybe somebody had used it for a camping spot or maybe arrowhead hunters. So he contacted some other friends of his, and they were all part of this archaeological society. He'd worked on professional digs before, and they contacted the property owner and got permission to start excavating Horn Shelter number 2, and we'll talk about what they found here. During the excavation, they went down through 27 different layers containing history from different periods of time. The deeper they went, the older it got. Went from all the way from modern times, thought maybe bootleggers had even used the shelter to bootleg liquor during Prohibition, got down into historic times, finding metal artifacts and that kind of thing. One thing they discovered was that they think about 500 years ago a big flood had pretty much filled the shelter almost all the way to the top. So whatever was in those layers underneath that from 500 years ago, or from older than 500 years ago, was pretty well preserved. They removed all the disturbed soil and then established a grid and started removing dirt grid by grid by grid and deposits. They found a lot of it was fill from where the roof of the limestone cave had caved in, or the walls had caved in, preserving what was underneath. They found pre-archaic deposits, archaic. They just kept going down, eventually going about 20 feet deep. At the bottom of the deposits, the oldest dates they were getting back were 13,500 years plus. They found hearths and fire rings, places where campfires had been made. They found charcoal they could carbon date. They've got methods now where they can carbon date pollen samples and that kind of thing. And they saved everything out of this cave that they found. If it was mouse bones or whatever, they screened every inch of dirt and cataloged and marked all the finds that they made. One of the more interesting finds, or probably the most interesting find that they made during this excavation, was at an area that dated to about 11,500 years ago. They unearthed a double grave. A grave of two people. They were sort of in a fetal position, facing the west with their heads facing north. A man thought to be about 40 years old, and a female child, girl between 10 and 12 years old, facing his back, buried in the same position. They found all kinds of artifacts with these two individuals, things they thought it might be, like they found a bunch of shells that had been drilled at one end. They think at one time it might have been some kind of jewelry, but the thread holding it together had rotted away. They found another bunch of artifacts near the hip of the man. Had like an antler bone tool and some stone tools, a stone tool where some big flakes had been removed, a biface of Edward's church. And they think at one time all these things might have been in a pouch, but the pouch had rotted away. They found a sewing needle with an eyelet drilled through it, made out of bone, near the skeleton of the small girl. When they kept going underneath these skeletons, when they got into Folsom era tools and such, then they got into Clovis. These two individuals were there during the end of the last ice age. So this is an astonishing find. These are probably, it's the only double grave of Paleo Native Americans that's known to exist, and it's definitely the oldest one in North America. The oldest skeleton ever found in England, where they think they've got evidence of humans being there for 90,000 years or whatever, is something they call Cheddar Man. They think he's about 10,000 years old. This is older than that. So this is a remarkable find. The skeletons are still being studied at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. And their Paleo-American Studies department has been studying these for years. They were able to even recover some DNA from the child, and the DNA sort of was a better match for people that they would have thought lived on the East Coast during these times. So how did these people wind up in the middle of Texas on the Brazos River 11,500 years ago? Did they come from the East? I mean, that matches what we hear from some Native American societies, claim that they migrated west from the East Coast. This is possible. Or were they from somewhere else? We don't know. They think that the man was of some kind of importance, possibly a shaman or a healer. He was also, under his head there was two turtle shells, one inverted on top of the other, and there were some artifacts also put inside those turtle shells in between, and then his head was laid on top of those. Very carefully placed in the grave and very carefully buried. On top of the bodies there were about 20 big pieces of limestone that they had placed on top of the bodies, but then they left the heads uncovered, and then the whole grave filled in on top of that, but probably to discourage animals or something from bothering the bodies. So very interesting find at Horn Shelter number 2 there on the Brazos River, about 11 miles south of Lake Whitney, about 30 miles north of Waco. People have been in this area for a long time, and the stuff that they found at the Horn Shelter, like I said, it's still being studied. One man, Albert Redder, he was a World War II veteran, and he had been back and he wound up spending 24 years excavating that shelter, so most of his life. Well, not most of his life, big part of his life. I think he's still alive, and maybe he's over 100 years old now, so anyways, he made what a wonderful contribution to the archaeology that this man made, dedicating all that time to studying this shelter and making sure that everything was done in a way where it could be verified and scientifically investigated. Anyways, horn shelter number 2 on the Brazos River. You can Google that if you'd like to learn more about it. Oldest Paleo-American grave in North America, and quite a find. And we'll catch you next time.